Hey guys, welcome back to AS Tech. Today we're going to be talking about the new 2020 MacBook Pros. Now, this is going to be a video guide for people who have decided that they want a 13-inch MacBook Pro, but aren't quite sure how to spec it out. So whether you're a student, a casual Mac user, or even a professional, hopefully this video will help you guys in deciding which MacBook Pro to get. So before we get started, let's take a quick look at what's new for 2020. Now, this year is a slight spec bump, which usually wouldn't make big news, but this year it does, and here is why. So of course we can spec it up to the new 10th generation Intel processors, so you do get a slight boost in performance, which is always nice. However, this is only available on the mid-tier model, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. You do get a dedicated escape key, as you guys can see right here, and I know a lot of people were complaining about not having that, and it's back, and I think it's definitely a plus. And lastly, the biggest and most important change here by far is the new Magic Keyboard. So let's talk about that for just a second. So for the past couple of years, for those of you who don't know, Apple has been using their own butterfly switches on the keyboard, and they had lower key travel, and they were supposed to be this new innovative keyboard style. However, that didn't end up happening. A lot of people were not a big fan of the smaller key travel, and that's more of a subjective topic. Some people liked it, some people didn't. I personally didn't mind it too much, but it definitely was not my first choice for a keyboard. The biggest issue was reliability. So the issue here was that dust and debris could get inside the keyboard and render some keys useless or hard to use. And Apple does have the keyboard repair program going on right now, but it's just not worth the hassle. So if you're considering an older Mac model to save money, I recommend to stay away. I highly recommend going with the new 2020 models. These new Magic keyboards feel better and will definitely last you longer. And before we get started, if you do have a .edu email address, so if you are a student, you can get $100 off of any Mac, so that's always a bonus. So I'm going to break this down into three main categories: the best base model MacBook Pro, the best mid-tier, and the best high-end. As you guys can see, Apple does have 4 MacBooks pre-configured, and we'll talk about those in just a second. So to start off, let's go with the base. The base starts at $1,300 and it has an 8th generation Core i5 processor clocked at 1.4 GHz. Now, people might think that this machine will be slower due to an older processor, however, this is not the case. In Geekbench 5, when compared to the newer 10th Gen i5, it was about 30% slower in the single core and only about 11 to 13% slower in multi-core. So for many people, this 8th Gen is going to be the better value, and that's where I would put my money as well. The difference in power isn't going to be big enough for most people to upgrade to the 10th Gen. Now, as I scroll down here, you guys can see I do have a second option for a quad-core 8th generation Core i7. And it's a $300 extra upgrade, and it is not worth it, because at that point, you may as well spend the extra $200 and go for the $1,800 mid-tier model. Because even if you do upgrade and keep everything else the same, you're still sitting at only 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage, so I recommend sticking with the Core i5. Now, here's where it gets a bit tricky. As of today of filming this video, Apple has bumped the price up for the 16GB upgrade from $100 to $200. So my original configuration was 16GB of RAM and 512GB of storage for $1,600. However, at $1,700, it is just hard to recommend. For additional $100, you can get a much better value in the mid-tier option. So to adjust, here's what I recommend. I recommend sticking with the 16GB of RAM by going with 256GB of storage. The reason being is with 16GB, it's more future-proof, and also if you're doing like heavy multitasking, or if you're going to be using more graphic intensive programs or just running a bunch of things in the background, this is definitely going to give you more usability. And for storage, obviously 256GB might not be enough for some people. However, you can definitely find a cheap external hard drive to use for less than $200 and get a better value. So at $1,500, I think this is the best value for most college students if they need the extra power and they want to save as much money as possible. I think this is definitely the best way to go. Now, let's talk about mid-tier. So you guys can see that the second least expensive option is the $1,500 option MacBook Pro. The only difference here is the 512GB SSD upgrade from the 256. Other than that, you still get the same 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports, the same processor, and the same graphics, as well as the same RAM. So everything else is exactly the same. So for the best mid-tier option, I recommend the base $1,800 model. So over here we get a 2.0 GHz quad-core 10th Gen Core i5. You do get slightly better graphics as well with the Intel Iris Plus graphics. You do start off with 16GB of RAM, and do keep in mind that you are getting DDR4 memory here instead of DDR3, so you do have a slight increase in speed, but for most people it's not going to be anything noticeable. Also, you get a 512GB SSD storage by default, as well as 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports. So, like I said, I would keep this the exact way it is. I would not touch anything else, because I think this is the best laptop for most people. If you're a casual Mac user and you want to buy a MacBook that'll last you for the next, couple years, 5-6 years, I think this is definitely the way to go. Or if you're a college student and you need something that's gonna be able to run more heavier tasks, something more powerful, and you need that slight bump in speed and power, I think this is definitely the best way to go. So now let's talk about high end. Now, believe it or not, the most decked out MacBook Pro is not going to be the best value, and here's why. So the fourth option here is the $2,000 13-inch MacBook Pro, and the only difference between this one and the last one is that 1TB SSD upgrade. Other than that, you get everything else the same. So I'm going to go ahead and select this, and again, the $200 upgrade for the Core i7 is just not worth it for the price. For the amount of power extra you're getting, I think the Core i5 is going to be fine for most people. I would definitely upgrade the memory to 32GB, especially if you're a professional. I think this will be great for super heavy multitasking and more video and photo editing, especially at 4K. And I would definitely keep the storage at 1TB. I think that's going to be fine for most people, and especially for $400, the 2TB is just not worth it. Even if you need the extra storage, you can always buy a cheaper external hard drive. So at $2,400, this is what I recommend for most professionals, for people who really need the extra power and the extra memory. Now, if you don't care too much about portability, I would highly recommend taking a look at the 16-inch because you get much more power for the price. But if you are set on the 13-inch MacBook Pro, this is the way to go. So this pretty much concludes my buying guide for the 2020 13-inch MacBook Pro. So just to summarize, for the cheapest MacBook Pro, I would go with a 13-inch model and I would upgrade just the RAM. For the mid-tier, I would go with the base $1,800. So the $1,300 model is good enough for most college students. $1,800 would be better for more casual users who want to keep it for a long time, or for college students who need the extra power. And I would select the $2,000 model and upgrade to 32 gigs of RAM for most professionals. And if you guys have any other specific situations that you guys need help deciding what specs to get, you guys can always leave a comment down below and I will be responding to all of them. But anyways, guys, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.